Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of YouTube videos to help you improve your chess game. In our last video, we talked about how to slow down for people that play too fast. So I thought it was only natural that we'd follow that up with a video on how to speed up for those that play too slow. All right, so let's start with a little conversation, which is when I've taught people, let's say at the intermediate level, about 80% of them have time management problems. And not all of them have macro time management problems, meaning they play too slow for the whole game or too fast for the whole game. They might have a micro time management problem where they don't recognize critical moves and they don't allocate more time to critical moves than they do to non-critical moves. But for today, we're going to continue talking about the macro problems, which is just playing too slow for the overall game so that you get into what I would call unnecessary time trouble. What's unnecessary time trouble? Unnecessary time trouble is where you get toward the end of the game and you have to play faster than what you should for the position, not because the earlier part of the game was really complicated and now you've run out of time, but because you took way too much time on the earlier part of the game when it really wasn't as important. And now that you're getting to some more critical moves later in the game, you don't have the time to really give the moves the thought that it deserves. So that's what I call unnecessary time pressure. And people who play too slow get into unnecessary time pressure all the time. What I found is there's roughly about 3 different types of people that have macro time management problems. The first would be people who play too fast, but they think that they really don't know what to think about. They want to slow down. They don't know how. They don't know what a good player thinks about. And they just don't have the information to slow down. Those type of people are the easiest type to help because they want to slow down. And once you start telling them they have to look for better moves, they have to make sure their moves are safe, and here's how you do it, then they do slow down. The second type are people who play too fast, but they can't help themselves. And no matter how much you tell them to check to see if their move is safe or look for better moves, they really don't want to do it. They have no real interest in slowing down. And they're a lot harder to help than people who just don't know how to slow down. The third group is the group we're talking about in today's video, which are people who play unnecessarily slow. They're too cautious, they're too afraid, they think they're going to make a mistake. A lot of the people who play too slow make the following argument to me. They say, yes, I know I can play faster, but I'm not that good, and if I play a little faster, then I'm going to make mistakes and I'll lose a lot more games in 10, 15, 20 moves than I do now. Okay, well, that is absolutely true, that if you play a little slower, you're going to make less mistakes, assuming what we talked about in the previous video, which is if you play a little slower, you're going to play a little bit better. The problem is, for every game that you save where you took 5 minutes on a move where you should have taken 2 early in the game, and that extra 3 minutes helped you save the game, and therefore you didn't lose in 15 moves, you played longer. For every game that you play like that, there's probably going to be 10 games where you get low on time by move 20 or 25, and the game's going to go 40 or 50 moves, and then you have to play really fast, and you throw away the game that way. Or even the game where you did possibly avoid losing in 15 moves. Let's say you took 5 minutes on your 15th move instead of 2, and you avoided a big problem, and you did that on several moves in a row, and you made the game go longer. Well, then you almost surely lost later anyway, because unless you're a really good player and you can play safe moves really fast, then you get into the unnecessary time trouble anyway, and you lose the game later anyway. So the point is, you don't want to lose games like that at all. In fact, I could make a blanket statement and say, you never want to lose a game on time where you're not losing and you have an increment or a time delay. Because it's way, 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 way worse to lose a game on time than it is to make some bad moves and lose the game. Because at least if you make bad moves, you're trying to play the right way. You're trying to get your moves in. And your opponent has to play well enough to beat you. If you play too slow and you get into unnecessary time trouble and your flag falls, then you're just beating yourself. And of course, if you have let's say you have an even game and you only have a few seconds left on your clock, but you have, let's say, a 30-second increment, well, okay, if you move too fast, you might make a mistake and lose the game. But if you don't make a move, your clock will fall and you're 100% lose the game. So it just doesn't make any sense. these days with increments and time delays, you never see a good player lose a game unless he's on time, unless he's already dead lost and he's just looking for a way to get back in the game. Anything else would be, somebody falling asleep or something like that, because you just don't see that anymore. Good players would never do that. So let's look at some positions where playing too slow typically occurs, and I like to use the fifth move of the Cole system as an example. Let's say you play d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, and okay, the fourth move here. And now it's white's turn. And let's say you're out of your book now. You're white and you're out of your book. But you know that by general principles, you should develop your king, bishop, and then castle kingside. Okay, and let's say you figure out that bishop b5 check isn't so wonderful because black can play c6, which is an AWL move. If you don't know what that is, I have an earlier video on attack with something worth less. Or even bishop b5 check, bishop d7 when you're trading off your good bishop for his bad bishop. Either way, bishop b5 check is a really bad move, but bishop e2 is reasonable and bishop d3 is reasonable. Okay, so you don't know which one to play, and you figure, well, maybe it's going to make a difference. All right, so how much time is reasonable? Well, we talked in a previous video that the average amount of time in a game is you start out by assuming there's 40 moves in a game, and let's say this is 45-45. You divide 40 moves into 45 minutes, which is a little over a minute a move. Add the 45-second increment, which takes us to a little less than 2 minutes per move. So what is a little less than 2 minutes per move? But taking 2 minutes on this move is insane because it's not critical at all. Your opponent has no threats, there's no danger, there's no clashing of the pieces. So this is actually the kind of move where if you don't know what to do, you probably want to more take 20 seconds in a 45-45 game than you want to take 2 minutes. But let's say you don't know to play bishop e2 or bishop d3 and you're worried it's going to make a big difference. Well, the first thing is you should have enough confidence to know that they're both safe and they shouldn't make a giant piece of difference. And if they don't make the giant piece of difference and you're not sure what to do, you could just flip a coin and put your bishop on e2 or d3. Let's make both moves and ask Stockfish what the evaluation of the position is. So, okay, bishop d3. Stockfish, gotta change the size of the window a little bit here. I'll move it up and I'll move it back in a minute. Okay. Let's get the screen back a little bit better aligned. All right, so Stockfish, what's the position? What's the evaluation here? Stockfish says if white plays bishop d3, he's ahead about, right now it's 0.07, now it's 0.17, now it's 0.12, 0.23. All right, so we could kind of average this out and say white's ahead by roughly about 1/10 of a pawn. It's a little less right now. It'll probably go back to being a little more. Stockfish likes to jump up and down, but somewhere around 1/10 of a pawn. All right, now let's look at bishop e2. White plays bishop e2. What's the evaluation now? Minus 0.02, minus 0.12, plus 0.05, plus 0.25, plus 0.23. It's all the way up to plus 0.4. Now down to plus 0.3. All right, so we could say it's maybe around 0.2, although it's dropping back down. So Stockfish, and now it's 0.1. Stockfish basically thinks they're about the same. They're both hanging around 0.1, 0.2. I would say, based on the numbers we saw, it likes bishop e2 very much microscopically better. Almost not at all. So what we're seeing here is what we call a non-critical move. If you know to play bishop e2 or bishop d3, the chances that you pick the wrong one and it's going to affect the game are basically zero. But that means you're much more likely to negatively affect the game if you take 2, 3, 4 minutes making a move like this than you would affect the game if you pick the wrong move. That's the very definition of a non-critical move, and that's what you want to avoid. Anytime you have positions like that, you don't want to take a lot of time. So let's say black plays bishop d6. And now you don't know if you should play c3 or knight bd2 or castle. Okay, so again, and you can see Stockfish is saying you have another possibility, which is to play the Cole-Zukertort idea, which is to play b3 here, which is about even. But let's say you don't know what to do. Again, this is a non-critical move. If you castle, let's say he says b3 is equal, and you castle, you could see he still says it's about equal. It's still close to equal. Right now he's down to minus 0.2 or so. Now he's back to minus 0.1. But basically there's almost no difference from playing the other moves. So these are very, very, very small differences in these moves. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. And I even tell people, if you're not sure what to do and you're out of your book, and you know that castles is safe, and you have other candidate moves, you can almost never go wrong by castling. Because if we look at the top few moves, and castling is a safe move, castling's always going to be near the top of the list. Right now, for instance, castling is number 3, but it's only a few hundredths of a pawn below number 1. And that's going to be true in a lot of positions where you can castle, which means you can save a lot of time when you don't know what to do if you can castle safely to just pretty much castle safely. You're not going to be a lot better by trying to look for moves that are slightly more accurate than castling because you want to castle anyway. All right, let's turn off Stockfish for the moment, and we'll make the board bigger again. Okay, back to full size. Fix it on the right a little bit. Okay, so these are the kind of things that you want to do to speed up a little bit, because we don't want you to speed up on critical moves. We don't want you to speed up on moves where you're calculating tactical sequences. Those are the moves you need to get right. We want you to speed up earlier in the game on moves where not much is happening and you could just make a move and get onto the middle game. There is such a thing as Botvinnik's rule. Botvinnik's rule is you want to play your first 15 moves of a game, of a normal opening, in about 20% of the time on your clock. So if you're playing a 90-minute game with a 5-second increment, let's assume the increment's close to 0. If you're playing a 95 game, then 20% of 90 is 18. 90 minus 18 is 72. So if you're playing over the board and you're writing down your moves, you could write a little 72 next to your 15th move before the game starts. It's perfectly legal to do that. And that'll be your goal, is to try to have around 72 minutes left when you get to move 15. Of course, if you're playing the martial attack and it's 15 book moves, you're going to still have 90 minutes left on move 15 or close to it. But on the other hand, if you play the King's Gambit and you've got some crazy, peace sacrifice line, you're going to play slower than that. But 90% of your games are not going to be like that. They're going to be normal openings where you know 6 or 7 moves, and you're going to be out of your book, and you want to take roughly no more than 20% of your time for your first 15 moves. That's world champion Botvinnik's suggestion to his students. If you do that, then you're well on your way to not playing unnecessarily slow. Now, you can't follow Botvinnik's rule and then just speed up like a rocket. Not speed up like a rocket. Slow down. Got the wrong video. You can't just play Botvinnik's rule and then slow down tremendously on the 16th move and expect to be okay. You have to still continue to play at a reasonable pace. But that at least gets you off to a good start. And getting off to a good start is, of course, very important. So I tell my students, pay very close attention to Botvinnik's rule. Try to calculate the rule. For a 45-45 game, one of my students did the math. It's a little more complicated with large increments. But basically it says if you're playing a 45-45 game, you want to have 40 or 41 minutes left around move 15 because the increment eats up into a lot of that time you're taking early in the game. So 45-45, maybe 40 or 41 minutes left at move 15, after your 15th move. All right, I have a book in front of me called The 7 Deadly Chess Hints by John Rowson. And this was a fairly popular book. It's copyright 2000, so it's now 20 years old. And he has a chapter called Perfectionism. And perfectionism is one of the deadly sins that people who play too slow have. They want to do things perfect. They don't want to admit they're making mistakes. They want to avoid mistakes, and they play too slow. So in this chapter, he has a subsection of the chapter called The Causes of Time Travel, The Causes of Time Trouble and a Few Remedies. And I'm going to read you the causes that he talks about. And each one has a remedy. And I'm not going to read you all the remedies because we don't have time. But I'll read you the causes of time trouble. And in each one he has, something that you can do about it. Number 1 is complexity of the game. Number 2 is deliberately running short on time. Number 3 is poor theoretical preparation. 4 is lack of practice. 5 is doubts concerning analysis. Number 6 is fear of the opponent or seeing ghosts. Number 7 is a crucial game with extra tension. Number 8 is time-wasting thoughts. Number 9 is fear of the unknown. Number 10 is attraction to complex positions. Number 11 is general indecision. Number 12 is excessive attention to detail. Number 13 is excuse provision. Number 14 is going on walkabouts. Number 15 is deep thinks. Number 16 is turning up late for the game. Number 17 is failure to make adequate use of the opponent's thinking time. And number 18 is attention seeking. So I can't read all these, but I'm going to read 2 of them. I'm going to read the one about doubts concerning analysis, and I'm going to read the one about general indecision, which are related, obviously. And these are 2 of the ones that my students get into the most when they play too slow. So first, let's read what Grandmaster Rowson says in the 7 Deadly Test Sins about doubts concerning analysis. He says, this leads to the constant checking and rechecking of variations because you don't trust yourself to get it right the first time. Which, of course, if it's a very, very critical line, yes, if you see that you have mate in 3, you don't just go play it. You need to check it a few times because the game's going to be over anyway. That's me saying that, not Rowson. Let's continue with what Rowson says. He says, normally this stems from a lack of confidence and excessive fear of making a mistake. It also tends to afflict players who don't like to calculate much, and so when they have to do it, they don't do it very well. My simple advice would be to face up to the fact that mistakes are inevitable. Just allow yourself to make mistakes. It's no crime. The biggest mistake is constantly to be afraid of making a mistake. It's much better that you just trust yourself. Even if you do make a few little mistakes, because then at least you'll stop making this big one. This big one, of course, being what I call getting into unnecessary time trouble. So what he's saying is, people are human, your opponents are human, you're going to make mistakes. You try to take more time on the critical moves to avoid the biggest mistakes, but on most moves where it's not super critical or super complicated, you can't just check and recheck and sit there and worry about the fact that you're going to make the wrong move. You probably will in a lot of the moves. The chances you're going to make the very best move on every move is not very high, but that's okay as long as you've taken a reasonable amount of time and you're not playing too fast and you play just right, what I call the Goldilocks idea, and just make a move in a reasonable amount of time, and if it's not the best one, join the crowd. Okay, the other one I wanted to read was general indecision. You can't make up your mind. The which rook question is a classic example. If you dither for 20 minutes over rook on f to d1 versus rook on a to d1, then you're letting yourself down. Just get on with it. At such moments, it is worth asking yourself if you will need this time more later than you do now, and more often than not, the answer is yes. In such situations, you are paralyzed by your choices and lack the confidence to make an educated guess. In this respect, I am a great believer in John Nunn's advice. Chess is all about making decisions. Postponing a decision doesn't necessarily improve it. Try to get into the habit of asking yourself, is further thought actually going to be beneficial? End of John Nunn's quote. Another question to ask yourself is this problem solvable? And if so, how long will it take me? Often the answer will be no, in which case you just have to make a good guess. And if the answer is yes, but it will take a long time, you have to gauge whether you can afford the time to work it out, because it might be just more practical to guess. All right, so Grandmaster Rowson and Grandmaster Nunn are giving some good advice there. I might add a separate thing, which is, suppose you have a decision to make and you have an analytical position, one that where you have some tactics to calculate, or it's fairly analytical, like finding the best square to put your king on when you're in check. Okay, if you're doing such a position and you think you need more time, then if you have it, you probably should take it. But let's say you're in this bishop e2, bishop d3 kind of position here that we have in the Cole system. Then in these kind of decisions, which are not analytical but rather judgmental, taking more time on judgmental positions definitely does not improve your judgment. You can take 20 minutes on this move and use your judgment as to which one's better, and your judgment will probably not be better in 20 minutes than it was in 20 seconds. So if you have an analytical position and you need more time, if you have it, taking it might help you. In fact, it probably will. But if you have a judgmental position, then your judgment is not going to improve if you take more time, and therefore taking more time and playing too slowly in judgmental positions is 10 times worse than doing it in analytical positions. And you want to play the judgmental positions fairly quickly so that when you get to the analytical positions, you have the time to do it. Now, one thing you don't want to do is take this advice and overdo it so that you're playing so fast early that you get into terrible trouble and then you slow down and you try to get out of it. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what Rowson's saying. That's not what Nunn is saying. Do not play too fast until you get into trouble and then try to play slow. That's a terrible way to play chess. You want to try to take your time early to avoid getting into trouble. The problem is you want to do it the Goldilocks way, just right. You don't want to play too slow to avoid getting into trouble so that you get into time trouble too, as well as getting into other types of trouble. So there's a just right kind of in between there where you want to use your time very wisely. If you watch grandmasters play, they very often play their judgmental moves fairly quickly, and then you see them take long periods of time on these analytical, critical moves, because those are the moves that are deciding the game, and they trust their judgment, and they move relatively quickly on those moves. So you see, if you graph how long a grandmaster takes on his moves, you see these spikes in the graph where he has these really critical moves where he has to take the 15 minutes and figure it out. So those are the kind of things that you want to do. Okay, so let's look at one more example where I talk about my room full of grandmasters. I tell people, if you're willing to argue with a room full of grandmasters that your move is the best move, then you probably have a good idea what it is, and you can just make it. And so let's look at a really silly position to exemplify that. All right, e4, e5, knight f3, d6, d4, f6. All right, well here, white should play a move like bishop to c4 to take advantage of the weak light squares. But let's say he plays d takes e5, black plays d takes e5, and white plays queen takes d8 check. Okay, black has two moves here. He's got king takes d8. He's got king f7. You should be willing to stand up in front of a room full of grandmasters and quickly say, I think king takes d8 is the best move. King f7, I don't think any grandmaster in this move is going to spend any time arguing with me that king f7 is a better move. Therefore, there's absolutely no reason for me to take any time here. Just make sure I touch the right pieces and play king takes d8, and that's the best move. All right, so if you're willing to argue with a room full of grandmasters that that's the best move, and here you definitely should be, then play that move as soon as you're willing to argue with all the grandmasters. And here that should be immediately. Let's go back to the example from the previous video. Let's see here. I need to get my library out for a second. So let me write here, LIB. Okay, we'll get the library out. And 394. All right, so let's go to number 394. If you missed the last video, you might not have seen this. All right, so here, white played knight takes d4. And now black has to figure out, does he want to take with the bishop or does he want to take with the pawn? The fun of pros and cons. As John Nunn said, chess is about making decisions. And here black has a decision to make. Well, this decision isn't one you can make instantly. My student did, and he played bishop takes d4 and said, I didn't want to double my pawns. I didn't want to block my bishop with the pawn. But what he didn't look at was whether e takes d4 with his AWL attack the knight with something worth less, and that removes the guard on the e4 pawn, and the knight can then take it. Well, if black can get away with that safely, and it's not 100% clear that he can until you analyze it, if black can get away with that, then doubling the pawns and blocking the bishop so you can win the pawn is going to be better than not doubling the pawns and leaving the bishop open. Well, you could play this too fast like my student did and take 7 seconds, or you could play it too slow and you're worried that if you take with the pawn and then take the pawn, it's dangerous, and you could take 20 minutes on this move, which is also ridiculous. What's a reasonable amount of time since you might win a pawn here? Well, that makes it somewhat critical. So I could see taking 2, 3, 4 minutes here. I can't see taking really much more than 2 or 3. That would be kind of silly. But on the other hand, playing 7 seconds. So taking 7 seconds is wrong. But then again, taking 7 minutes is wrong also. Both of those will get you into trouble. So you need to do that Goldilocks idea and do something in between. So if you're one of those people who plays too slow and you get into unnecessary time pressure, you need to do the same kind of things we talked about in the previous video. You have to be aware of your problem. You have to be willing to fix it. For instance, if you're playing over the board, you could write down how many minutes you have left after each move, and while your opponent is thinking, you can say to yourself, am I playing too fast or am I playing too slow? And if you're playing too slow, start to speed up on the very next move. Don't wait till you get into time trouble. That's a terrible mistake. Once you realize you're playing too slow, start speeding up right away before you get into the unnecessary time trouble. So you want to be aware of the problem, you want to be willing to fix it, and then you want to be willing to do something about it, and then there's things that you can do about it that will make you start playing a little faster. These are all important steps, sort of like the steps of AA or whatever. Okay, so these are the things that you need to do, and if you're one of these people who play too fast or play too slow, like we talked about in the last two videos, then please start taking steps today to fix your problem. Fix it and you'll become a much better player. These are very, very serious problems for intermediate players that really keep them from becoming better players. Playing too slow can mask other problems. For instance, you never have enough time to play the end games, and then you're very poor at end games. Well, you might be poor at end games anyway, but we would never know because you don't have any time to play them. So we can't tell what you're doing because end games take analysis. All right, we're in the middle of the coronavirus. I'm stuck at home making videos and doing other things. So hopefully by the time you hear this, everybody in your family is okay. If you're hearing it during the coronavirus crisis here in early 2020, then please keep safe, keep social distance. They're now asking everybody to wear a mask in public. Even if your state doesn't have a stay-at-home requirement, which 8 states right now don't, please don't go out unnecessarily. It will spread. Viruses don't care. They'll spread everywhere. Please be safe. Okay, so for my video series here on YouTube, this is Dan Heisman. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button. If you like my channel, please hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.